Okay, it looks like we're recording. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the February 1st Budget and Facilities meeting. We're going to have a lively discussion about the 2021-2022 school budget. But before we begin, I'd like to ask everybody to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I thought being the flag bearer was my job. I'm just saying.
I know, but you're not talking, so you're not going to be on the screen. That's the problem. I happen to be in my office and I have one.
All right. I forgive you.
All right, we're going to, what's that?
Attendance.
Yes, we're going to start the meeting. Thank you. I got it. We're going to start the meeting with a roll call. Mary, can you go ahead and call the roll, Ms. Callahan?
Of course. Mrs. Johnson.
Here.
Mrs. Weisberg.
Here.
Ms. Bays.
Here.
Ms. Brooks.
Here.
Ms. Epstein.
Here.
Mr. Greenstein.
Here.
And Ms. Gilliard.
She'll be joining us shortly, but she is not here yet.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we can move on to the agenda. The first agenda item is the initial estimate for transfer to capital for 2021-2022. Mrs. Callahan and Mr. Restano, that would be you.
So in order to determine that, we need to focus on dollars for roof work because I think Jim will also agree that we still are looking at sealing, maintaining the envelope of the district, and the transfer to capital line is important to resolve because that impacts the tax levy limit formula, which can be changed, but initially has to be put on the comptroller's website by March 1st. So we have a month to make that determination. It can be edited in the future, but we do have that first deadline date to meet. As a reminder, in the current budget year, we have $1,444,110. If we carry that same number over, it does not increase the budget. And I think at our last meeting, we talked about the fact that we still have a large piece at Salem that needs to be replaced. And then the other sections, both at Schreiber and Daly, if we consider either of those, well, Schreiber actually has 6 sections that would cost about $740,000. And Daly, I think, has 2 sections that would cost about $880,000. So Jim, maybe you can give us what you think is your priority among those roofs, and we can try to settle on a number.
Mary, before we do that, can you say again the amount that we had in transfer to capital this year as a reminder?
Yes, $1,444,100.
Mary, can you also just repeat? So Schreiber was 740. What was the number for Daly and Salem?
Schreiber, as of the exact estimate, was $739,673. And Daly was $887,608. Salem is going to be $1,166,000 based on the architect's estimate.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Schreiber, one more time. I wasn't going to write them down, but now I am ready.
Sure.
I got Daly and Salem. Schreiber?
$739,673.
Thank you.
They're closing trains, guys.
Mary, did you want me to prioritize that? Is that what you said?
Yes, if you can, Jim.
Well, yeah, the worst, and again, Salem is definitely the worst at this point. So that is number one. That's the largest dollar amount. And after that, it's they're equally as needy. Those are the three. So if you want to make it a 1 and a 2, that's where I would probably like to see that. So the three sections is Schreiber, Daly, and I'm sorry, Schreiber and Daly. The other two I meant should be priority 2.
Well, I'm
Which would
sorry, maybe I misstated the numbers. There are 6 sections at Schreiber that make that total the 739,000. So
You want me to break it down
the
by?
question is, can we do 2 sections at Schreiber?
Out of all of Schreiber, there's one that stands out the most, and that's over the I believe it's like just over the library wing. I don't have that price in front of me. What number that entails? I don't have it with me today.
So Jim, you're saying that if you had to choose right now, Salem is absolutely the most important one that needs to get done first. And then you would put Schreiber and Daly together,
Yeah, that's what yes,
right?
that's what I'm saying. Correct.
Okay.
But
Even
again, as to Larry's, to go back
see
to
it, Deb.
Larry, well, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Jim.
To go back to Larry's point last week about, last meeting, when he said we're always prioritizing and knocking down, and I do understand what he meant, and we always are trying to get the best bang for the buck, but years are going by, and these roofs are still not done. So they are getting to the point where they are needed. So, and we were always also trained to have a B and a C and a D. So that's the way I've always tried to do things since I'm at Port Washington. But we're at the point where now we have an A and a B, which is pretty good.
So I guess the question is, if we decided to stay at the 1.4 that we had this year, let's just call it 1.5, what would we do? Because the Salem is 1.16. So would we be able, I guess the question is, if we decide to stay there, will we be able to add sections to get to that number, or does it not make sense to do it that way, Jim, is the question.
What I would, if that number were to be spent on roofing, I would say get the Salem out of the way, because that is one that we put that temporary roofing on, that we was only supposed to have 3 years out of it. And I believe we're going into maybe 4 or 5 right now. That is definitely the one. And if you had the balance of the money left, put off, or we could put it towards the other smaller sections. But again, I believe Mary just sent me an attachment. I'm going to look. So if that helps answer your question,
Yes.
I would say the Salem roof has to, that you have to bite the bullet and get that one done.
Okay.
That's the bulk. That's the bulk of the money.
Right. Deborah?
Thank you. You mentioned, Jim, that there was one section at Schreiber that takes priority over the other 5 sections. Would you put that one? I know you couldn't break out the cost.
Well, I can't, but I would put that, in other words, if we want to start going down and making that priority list a lot longer, that would be number 1.
So that one section of Schreiber would join all of Salem, leaving 5.
I'm sorry. Yes. If that's how you want to look at it. Yes.
If we had to,
if we could do that, if we could get it for the balance, which it's possible, that would be the way I would go. Yes.
So I wanted to know, does that does that ruin the economy of scale in doing all of the Schreiber 6 sections together? Because I imagine it's not going to stay 6 sections. Eventually it'll be more sections at Schreiber, but does it change economy of scale in the long run?
Not if you're bidding it with that other roof, which is a big roof. You'd probably wind up with the same contractor.
Okay.
And just to note, there is a lot of other work on this one section in Schreiber that I'm talking about, and additional to roofing, because there's a lot of rooftop equipment on that roof, and it's very busy. So it's not only roofing, there's some equipment that would probably have to be lifted to remove the old roof. So it's a very tricky one.
It's not as straightforward. I understand.
Correct. It's not.
And my next question is, we had the Schreiber cafeteria line in at one point. If we are going ahead with the renovations at Schreiber beginning in the summer, which is my current understanding, what are we doing with the cafeteria line at Schreiber? Are we not changing that when we go through this massive construction project? Because I think that was part of a transfer to capital that dropped out at some point.
I don't think it didn't drop out.
We had a meeting this morning, a construction meeting this morning on that project. And the kickoff meeting actually happened this morning. So,
But I think we left that Mary, we left that in the budget last year and transfer to capital.
We did, and that money is set aside and can only be used for that purpose because it was voted upon by the community for that specific reason.
So is that then part of the $1,444,110, or is that in addition to?
That is including the cafeteria work in the current budget, $1,444,000.
Okay, so when we talk about the $1,166,000 for the Salem, there's also the cafeteria line in there.
No,
No, not within the 1,166. I'm saying in addition to
the cafeteria line is in this year's budget, so that is already taken care of.
Okay, so it doesn't have to come out of the 1,444,100.
It came out of that money this year. If we choose to put that much, first of all, let's just be clear. The 1,444,000 that we're talking about is not a number set in stone. That is only if we choose to roll over the same number from last year, which is not a choice we have to make. We can add more, we can do less, we have options. So we're using that as a baseline, but the cafeteria line is not something we need to discuss. We have already voted on it, and it is not something that it's done. The cafeteria line is covered financially already. So the projects that are before us that we're discussing for next year are these are the projects that Jim and Mary are coming to us and saying, these are the ones we need for next year.
I understand, but in case we don't want to change the $1,444,100, I'm trying to understand, after we finish with the Salem roofs, we still have roughly $300,000 to play with?
Yeah,
That's what I understand. That does not include the
you can do
cafeteria line.
The cafeteria line is, forget about the cafeteria. That's paid
I just want to
for.
make sure.
That would be like, let's say you're going to buy a car. You're not going to take out a loan to buy the car you bought last year. We already bought the cafeteria line last year.
I just want to be sure I understand. Okay, so we have about 300,000 if we don't want to increase the transfer to capital for 21, 22. Okay,
Right, so we could do additional sections, or we could increase that number.
Julie?
And I'm sorry, and prior boards had indicated that they would put $110,000 in the transfer to capital line for ongoing asbestos work. I don't know. I had an expectation that would also be in this upcoming budget, but you tell me.
I think Mary and I want to go to Julie and then Emily and somebody else has a hand up. However, I think that the first conversation we really have to have here is is this the number we want? Should we increase the number, given what we want to do, or should we stay with this number? Because this number, we can increase this number without impacting programming. It doesn't change this, right, Mary, correct me if I'm wrong, but this number can go up without us having to take money from other parts of the budget.
Well, if you increase this line and consider all the requests that have come in, we then have to look at what the overall budget is, the percentage, and what the levy limit is, and what the gap becomes. So that is why at this point, I only used the existing number so that the budget would not increase in the
Right.
transfer to capital line. So the question of whether it impacts programming, I think you have to think that there is some impact, because right now, the very first draft budget does have a gap in it already relative to the levy.
So maybe that's the conversation that we should be having before we have this one.
So would you like to switch gears? We can do that.
I mean, Julie and Nora and Emily have questions. Do you want to wait for those questions and have the other conversation first?
But that was my question, so I'll take.
Okay. So Emily's hands. Nora, Julie?
That was also part of my question as well. So yes, thank you.
Okay, so let's move on to the larger discussion about where we are as far as that gap looks, and then we can move forward.
Okay. Having put in the requests of all the principals and directors, we do have a draft budget, which is, for everybody's knowledge, not the final number. This is for conversation only. We have a 2.85% budget increase that would result in a levy increase of 1.79. However, in order to accomplish that, I am using the full state aid number from the governor, which includes $1 million in expected money from the federal government. So keep that in mind. If that does not come, then our revenue is down by $1 million. It includes $1,600,000 from unassigned fund balance as a revenue. And it still results in a gap of $947,000 at first blush. So if we were to go back and talk about transfer to capital, when you increase your transfer to capital line, that actually reduces your gap because it is considered an exclusion in the tax levy limit formula. However, it only reduces your gap if that added money comes from someplace else within the budget that's already planned. If you increase the budget as you increase the transfer to capital line, then your gap remains the same.
Could you repeat that last sentence for me? I was taking a note. If you
increase your transfer to capital line, but you also increase your budget, your gap remains the same. Once you've established a draft budget, you know what that gap is, if you want to add more money for roofs, you can do that. And because it's an exclusion from the cap formula, it adds more money to the taxpayer portion of the levy and takes away from what the board has to take out of its savings. But if you increase the overall budget, then you're right back where you started. So when the question was asked earlier, increasing the capital line doesn't affect program, it might. It could affect program if you do not increase your overall budget. If you increase your overall budget, then it's not hitting anything in program.
Okay. I don't know who was first, Emily or Larry. Do you guys know?
Guy was, and then Larry, it's on the panel.
Okay.
But I wanted to ask Mary, she said, you said, Mary, that you're using the full state aid number. Can you tell me what that number is that you are using?
The number I am using is $11,912,332.
All right, 11.9.
And I had sent the board a memo that explained how when the governor includes STAR, that is really not a state aid that comes to us. That is the relief that the taxpayers get. And the governor is showing that so he can show how much money the state is spending overall to support education, because those are the checks that get mailed back to the taxpayers. He also includes the federal pre-K program, which for us is over $600,000. And their estimate for building aid is about, I think it was $300,000 higher than what we anticipate getting based on the filing of our claims. So while in the newspaper it may have said $15 million, the best number I see us getting is this $11,900,000.
Right. Okay, good. So this is why, and I know that Mary, you said you would join the meeting that we have with the Assemblywoman on February 11th, I believe.
11th, I think you
Alex, come downstairs for some lunch and to get some computers.
And computers, that's bad.
That's one of our students doing remote learning from the building. Thank you very much.
I know you, so I think these are the discussion of the state aid numbers are going to be relevant with our legislators. So that's why I was asking that question. But in the state aid numbers and the draft budget that you said with the levy increase that you have set, our allowable levy increase is not 1.79, correct? It's 1.32 or something like that.
1.23 is the number that was promulgated by the state.
So 1.23. So if we were to go and this and this budget that you're talking about, this is with all the requests that you have gotten from the principals. So this is basically what people would like to see in next year's budget.
Yes, but it has also taken out any of the current COVID, as we refer to them, COVID aids. And I know that we had 17 that were authorized, but when I checked with HR last week, we only had 10 positions filled. So those 10 positions were removed, and they were equal to about $400,000. I also took into consideration the list of teachers who have already given notice of retirement, with the expectation of that person being replaced by a less senior, less experienced person. So we have assumed a savings there in both salary and benefits.
Okay.
So as far as I know, any potential savings have already been withdrawn from this draft budget. But the principals, as I said, are meeting this week to talk about what they have initially requested.
So basically, you just answered, I think, my question. So basically, this budget that you put together is assuming that we are opening our buildings the way we used to open them in September of 2021. So we're not going to be in a hybrid situation or socially, we're going back to, right? That's what, if we're taking away the AIDS money, we're assuming that we're back to normal or what normal used to be.
Yes, and I did ask about the specific teacher requests, and I know Dr. Shields looked at those as well. And based on where our enrollment stands, we believe we still need those few extra positions.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. Dr. Hines, did you want to comment on what Emily said, or should I let Larry go first?
No, Larry, please, and then I'll follow up after Larry.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Go ahead, Larry.
good, because part of what I say is probably more for you than for Mary. Anyway, well, a couple of simple questions. Mary, what is our tax levy limit as you computed it this year?
As of the moment, it is 1.79.
Okay. Oh, so when you came up with this budget, the 1.79 is, but no, I'm saying, what is the tax levy limit according to the formula? Are we at it already at 1.79?
Yes, we are
Okay.
at the limit.
So if we add $1 more to the budget, we need an override.
No, we're above it, Larry. We're above it. We're over.
No, wait, but the budget's going up by 2.85, but the tax levy is going up by 1.79.
Yes, and our limit is 1.23, so we're over.
Oh, no, but is our limit 1.23 or is our limit 1.79? That's what I'm trying to find out, because it's a formula.
Okay. Our limit, based on our current transfer to capital number, our limit is 1.79, and we are at the limit. Last year was the one and only time that we went far below the limit, and
Okay.
left $1.9 million on the table.
Okay, no, okay, so that's what I wanted to know. So anything above the 1.79 would require an override. So the other thing, just to mention, we don't have to discuss it now, but by lumping everything into that category called service aid, rather than reimbursement money, means over in the future that amount can be held steady regardless of what it is that we actually spend, and regardless of whether our costs go up. So even though it might look like a decent number this year, going into the future is going to cause a lot of trouble. But my big question is, you've asked all the principals for their recommendations of the budget going forward. What, if any, has been put into the budget for to meet the board goals of equity? You know, what are we doing about all of that? We're going to get some recommendations from NYU. I'm sure they're not going to be free. How much money are we reserving for the priorities that the board has set, rather than a rollover budget based upon what the principals have been doing in the past? That's why I think it might be a Mike question.
Yeah, that's a really good question. If we're talking about a continuation of this year's goals to next year's goals, right now I asked Mary to budget for NYU to come back to do more work if necessary. So that's part of it for sure. And as far as, you know, the hiring of our staff, whether it's the multiple administrators that we have to now hire due to retirements, that will actually, I believe, potentially be some sort of a cost savings if we don't hire at the same salary, but we still want to have a more diverse staff. As far as programs are concerned, I don't know what programs we would be looking at this particular moment. I know we talked about a diversity coordinator of sorts, but right now that's not budgeted for within this budget. And I just want to add to that, Larry, what I was saying before is we have to consider our elementary FELP teachers that we have. You know, right now that's not in the budget. And so when we talk about the fact that if and when we have to stay the same for whatever reason, that's something that we have to consider potentially moving forward as well. So right now, to answer your question, we have NYU budgeted for next year as far as any potential work moving forward after this year. And then really trying to look at the staff that we're looking to hire over the next several months.
But nothing for any equity programs or things that NYU might recommend, where we have basically their salaries covered but nothing that they may come back and say, you need to do this, which is my concern, because every year we always start out with these great goals and every year we never have enough money to fund them. So,
Well-
to me, that would be a priority, even if we have to look at cuts elsewhere. We have to look at where we might have excess and be able to pull a few $1 million out to do the things that we're going to need to do to meet, well, I guess next year's board's goals, assuming they're somewhat similar to this, or whatever their goals are. The goals require money, but we're making a budget now with this board, so I think we have to use this year's goals in terms of budgeting. And if they want to move money, if next year's board wants to move money around, that's an option. But at this point, I think we do have to look to see where we can find some money to actually do the implementation, because having the consultants is great when they give us a report that gets put on the desk, gets put in a drawer and never gets looked at again, like our last equity report from 20 years ago.
So what I would add to that is, and I agree with what you're saying, is that, Dr. Mioli has been really looking through the way that we spend our title grants. And so there's money, I believe, to be found in some of the title grants, not $1 million, but certainly thousands of dollars if we have to look at it short term. But again, as we look at our equity work, it does tie into the work that Dr. Mioli is doing with the vision and mission, which then all funnels into our strategic plan, which begins in the summer. And I believe from there is when we would begin to plan long term as far as some of the things that you're considering as well.
Okay, thanks.
Dr. Hines, did you have anything else you wanted to add, or should I move on to Deborah?
No, that was it. I just want to be very clear with what Mary's talking about. To think that our threshold is 1.79, right? That's what the exclusions. It's not very high, right? And it doesn't take into account what we currently have this year when it comes to the extra staff that we have. So I think this is a conversation we need to continue to have. I've spoken with many of my peers, and right now it seems that many of them are not budgeting based on what they currently have as far as extras. So whether it's staff and so on. What I don't want to see is summer comes around, we're planning for September, and then I come to the board and say, hey, guess what? We need to hire 6 or 7 teachers for virtual, for the elementary kids who may need to stay home. So I just wanted to keep that in the front of your mind.
Deborah?
I just want to be sure I remember correctly. The money to pay the additional teachers for the fully virtual elementary kids and the money to pay the 17 or 10 EAs was not budgeted. It came out of our reserves, correct? It wasn't going to be a permanent thing going forward. We were hoping it was a one-shot deal, but do I remember correctly it came out of reserves?
Well, the money hasn't come out of the reserves yet, but yes, they were not originally budgeted. When I did the first draft of the budget, however, I used payroll documentation, who is on staff and in what department they are working. And so the 10 COVID EAs were in the dollar amount of what I budgeted for next year, but I have pulled those out. The few teachers I have not pulled out. And Chris, correct me, I think we had a PE teacher, an elementary teacher. Was there a third?
No, that's correct. We had a
Okay.
PE teacher and 1 elementary teacher that we increased in the FTEs when we set up the fully virtual plan.
Right.
So all things being equal, by the end of this year, this academic year, will any money have to come out of reserves in order to pay any of those other positions?
Yes, because we have spent the $2.6 million or so over and above what was planned for in the budget. We did a reconciliation within the last month to make sure that our number matched closely with the estimates that had come from the Buildings and Grounds Office and the various locations where items had been purchased for COVID expenses. We have stopped spending for the 2021 year as much as possible in an attempt to save as much of our expenditures. We also, unfortunately, though, have a lot of losses on the revenue side of the current year's budget. Jessica's on this call, and she would tell you as well that our continuing education program is totally lost. And Jim will tell you our revenues for the facilities use is down a great deal. I think I estimated that we are somewhere around $800,000 short on the revenue side of the budget. So I was hoping to get closer to June before I asked for a resolution to take money from fund balance to balance out our 2021 budget.
Yeah, I was trying to get an understanding of what we might have at our disposal for the 21-22 budget out of that, but it's dwindling. I understand. Thanks.
Right. Well, we have the fund balance picture that we will look at fully at one of our budget and facilities meetings, as well as a public evening meeting. But you do have restricted reserves and unassigned reserves that probably total somewhere around $13 million, I would say. Yeah, about $13 million. So we will have to look and see where we can take money from when we need it.
Rachel?
Sorry. So I'm just absorbing all of this, and thank you, Mary. I mean, to me, this continues to be kind of a topsy-turvy year. In a normal year, we would have a budget coming to us with the superintendent saying, here are the positions that I think are priorities, and we're budgeting for this many of them. And we have these couple of positions that we don't have the funds for, but we're holding those back and still thinking about them because we may have some savings elsewhere, and hopefully we'll get another couple of those positions in. And even though the budgets in Port Washington, and the entire time I've been on the board, and I think in the history that is in all of our memories, have been very tight, we usually end up being able to squeak in a couple of those extras too. Because there are retirements, or we end up having a little bit of revenue for something else. And, we're kind of counting our nickels at the end and getting an extra guidance counselor or an extra teacher that we need. And this year is the exact opposite of that. It seems like what we're doing is we have kind of our bare minimum that's coming in, and the picture may get worse from there if we're still in the middle of a pandemic. And we may end up having to fund a ton of other positions that we don't know that we're going to have to fund right now, and that will turn the entire budget on its ear. And of course, it's a tighter budget this year than in previous years because of the position we've put ourselves in with having a very small budget increase last year. Which I keep saying out loud because I want to remind the community that the budget increase last year was indeed very, very small, the absolute minimum that we could possibly do and still serve students, because I think we're going to need to be asking our taxpayers to go ahead and vote for a budget that is as robust as we can make it, even though these numbers mean it's still going to be pretty small. So my question is, how are we planning for these increased numbers? Is it just if COVID is still happening, we're going to be alarmingly over budget? Or is there a plan for how we would fund those other positions? Are we looking at cuts if we're still in the pandemic? And if we are looking at cuts, if we're still in the pandemic, do we need to be thinking about doing something much more drastic? Beth has mentioned a bond at various times, or Larry has mentioned piercing the tax cap. Do we need to be considering a larger measure to make sure that we can still serve students here, even if we are entering our worst case scenario for next year? And then the other piece is just, I can't seem to find a document that talks about what Dr. Heinz's wish list is for this year. Have I missed it, or is it that we are past the point of wishing for anything?
Yeah, here's my wish. A, the budget passes and we preserve as many programs as possible. I mean, you look at, and this is so overplayed, perfect storm, worst case scenario. But when you think about loss of revenue coupled with the fact that we are where we are with a low levy number, it really presents us with significant challenges. And again, I'm not going to last year, but we almost left $2 million on the table as well. For one reason or another, we are in this position right now where we're trying to preserve as much as we can. Now, the crystal ball comes into play where we look at our remote learners for next year, because that's a considerable cost. And like I said before, if we move in that direction and budget for that, right, which I don't think is a bad idea, just in case, we're talking almost $600 something thousand right there. And so if you budget for that and it doesn't come to fruition, then we could talk about some of the things, Rachel, that you were saying we usually add at the last minute, so on and so forth. So the wish list isn't there right now. I'm speaking with the principals and the directors as far as what are the non-negotiables for them, but they also are in a state of reality where, we slashed supplies last year to get to that certain number, right? We need to make sure they have enough supplies for next year. And so there's a lot of things that we're still managing right now. I think the most important thing is we realize we're dealing with a very low budget to budget increase and levy number. And my job when I make my recommendation to the board is to have as much of the programs that we have right now as possible. And like I said, looking at the way that we use our grants, I think that is something that we really need to take a deep look into. And when I say grants, I mean our title grants. And Mary, if you don't mind me asking, there was talks about federal relief, pandemic expenses, so on and so forth. I don't know how much we would be entitled to offset the 2.7 million that we've spent above and beyond our budget. If and when we ever do receive anything, I wouldn't even know or presume to know how much we would be potentially entitled to and when that would actually ever come in. I don't think it would be next year, I'm assuming, but have you heard anything about, how that could potentially help us in the short term by any chance?
Well, I do believe that the monies that were discussed in December is what is being included in that extra $1 million in state aid for next year, but that it is very likely that they will require that we create documentation for them on how that money is spent and that it's related to pandemic, although there has been no guidance on that yet. And the business officials are all very worried because we spent the money in the current year. So if we don't have evidence of buying masks and HEPA filters and all the associated hand wash and so on, perhaps we won't get that full $1 million. So there's the fear that I could be overestimating next year's state aid. I know that Jessica did file with FEMA. Now, you've heard me say over and over again how much we've already spent, $2.6 million. They were only willing to allow us to file for about $60,000 worth of those expenses. And of course, we have not seen anything yet. So as well-meaning as people are on high, the bureaucracy that we all experience getting this money to come down through the funnel could take years. The regulations that become associated with it could eliminate many of our expenses because of time frames. It's just an impossible. I would be lying if I said to you I know anything for sure.
You know, just one more thing related to Rachel's question. I do think it's incredibly important that we look at how we're spending our money in its entirety, because it may not just be, you know, the thought of adding more. You can still look at what we have and ask the question, is this working? Is this efficient? And no longer do it. Now, I will say that is always fraught with difficulties, because we have, not just here, but we have people who are very attached to some of those things, right? So these are the things that we really have to consider, because when we look at potentially reducing or removing something to pay for something else, you know what happens, right? People come up and they say, we want X, Y, and Z, please don't take this away. And we may have to do that this year as far as what I'm recommending. Do I have anything in mind right now? Somewhat, but I need to make sure that, you know, the cabinet's on the same page, and I share it with the board before I share it here with you at this moment.
Thank you. Nora, Larry, I'm not sure which one of you was first.
I don't know. Nora can go first.
Nora?
Yes. Okay. I just want to thank you. I clarify what Mary said just now about because before I thought you said that the federal aid of about $1 million was considered in the draft you have now. Are you saying that that million is speculative, that we don't know if we're getting it?
I would say it's speculative.
And that we don't know if that million could be used to make up, like, where this budget is assuming next year that we're not going to have additional COVID related expenses. Right now, that's the assumption in this budget.
Correct.
And but what we don't know is if that $1 million, which we would be theoretically getting, hopefully getting, no matter when we get it, but get it for the 21-22 year. What we don't know is if you could use some of that to replenish money in reserves or wherever that we spent and weren't reimbursed for this year and for the 4 months of last year. Is that correct? Like, we don't know if it's going to be
it wouldn't be used for the reserves. It would be used to offset next year's expenses as part of our regular state aid.
Overall, it's okay. I understand what you mean. Yes. Yeah. The other question I have, and it's for Mike, that the idea, which is always sounds like it's something we should be doing, is to be reevaluating and evaluating every year how we're spending the money we have, no matter how much that money is. And all the more so when it's going to be less, but it's obviously always taxpayer money and we always want to maximize it, and there's always more things we need. Given all of that, is this something that the principals are taking into consideration and really like combing through their budgets? Is that like a directive from you, or, you know, that maybe they do it every year, but it seems like this year more than ever, people really need to comb through, and some things obviously are going to have to stay the same, and maybe everything has to stay the same, but maybe a lot of things, maybe things can be changed. You know, I haven't gone through those budgets, but I'm wondering if that's been a mandate or suggestion or recommendation on your part yet to the others who are adding to this budget.
So the way we went about it for next year is to really ask principals and directors, what do they actually, need to maintain? You're not really adding anything per se. It's just, what is it? And I think, they did a really great job as far as not asking for staff, really. I mean, they kept it rather flat, which is great. When it comes to the programs per se, no, I didn't ask them to do a deep dive into, is this necessary for next year? And, I think that conversation has to happen for sure, especially as we begin to, I think, look at this budget and look at how we can tweak it over time. But right now, to be honest with you, it was about trying to keep the costs as low as possible, to share with Mary in a timely fashion, what do we absolutely need, and not, to keep everything budget neutral, so to speak, but not really doing an audit of programs and say to ourselves, is this something that we could potentially look to do without? But that conversation may have to come sooner than later.
Thanks.
Larry?
A couple of things. One is, if I read the aid run correctly, we got about $1 million in COVID relief, and then we had a subtraction of about $1 million in COVID relief. So I think we can be pretty well certain that any additional money we get will be offset, because the governor's position is that the federal funds should supplant the state funds, not supplement them. My concern is if we get less federal funds, I don't think he'll adjust downward what he's taken away from us. So I do think that any cuts from the feds will be added to state cuts, not supplant them. So it's sort of a one-way street. There's no way we'll get more, but we can very conceivably get less. So I wouldn't hold out for any more. But just in relating to what Nora just said, like Jim has given us priorities. This is an A priority, this is a B priority. I think we need to really do that with our programs, and the principals really have to look and say, and our directors, if I have to throw one of my children under the bus, which one is it? We know that all of the programs are important and they love all of them, but if we have to start making the cuts, it shouldn't be the board that's deciding what we're cutting. It should be coming from administration. And it should be coming, like we made a decision this year to cut back on AIS. That was a decision that the district made. Well, is that a decision going forward? Or, we look to preserve PEP. We look to preserve sports. We look to preserve a lot of things at the expense of other things. But so I really think we need a priority list of what is it that if we had $1 to spend, we would spend it on, and move up from that way. And because that way, if we do next year have the unanticipated expenditures, we know where we're looking already. We don't have to then start that process under a lot of pressure. And I think it would make a lot of sense. And I'm not saying anything we do is wasteful, but some things are mandated, some things are more important than others, some things are more cost effective than others. If you get the same amount of educational benefit from $100,000 as you get from $400,000, well, you're looking at $400,000 program. So things like that. So I just want to put that out there, and I think it'd be a good place, just as not necessarily even for this budget, but just as a going forward way that we look at things, that everything is sort of on the A list or the B list.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, Larry. Much like we did last year when we had to look at potentially reducing some different areas. I know one thing that is incredibly important, and we have to do it sooner than later, is to have inclusion at the elementary level. I mean, so there are things that, if we do reduce in some area, there are other things that I think are really, you talk about priorities, as Jim said, right? You have priority 1, priority 2. That is a priority moving forward, is to have inclusive settings within the elementary levels for sure. So we can certainly do that, come up with a priority list and have that for the board. And again, whether we use it this year or even next year, at least we have something to look at.
Rachel?
just to clarify, because I'm unclear on it, the things that we cut from the 1920 budget that are no longer in the 2021 budget because of the practical realities, which I think included some things that were very important, are those back in this budget for 21-22 currently as it stands? I mean, in other words, I understand the principals and directors gave you their wish list, but they made many cuts and we made district level decisions on cuts. Does the budget for next year, is it more a rollover from 1920 or more a rollover from 2021 minus the COVID expenses?
I would say it's a rollover budget from 1920 where principals and directors are trying to restore the lines that they have for their various programs. You will see a lump sum number in the budget for the high school for equipment, but within the high school, the principal then keeps a sub ledger and divvies out that particular dollar amount to about 12 different departments. So I think at least at the high school and the middle school, where there are multiple departments, they are trying to restore what they weren't able to spend this year and go back to a number that was reasonable in 1920. And while enrollment overall may be dropping, it's not happening at the middle school and the high school, I believe. It is more at the elementary school. So they still do need those numbers if we're going to maintain each of the programs that exist in those two buildings.
That's great. I mean, it seems to me from a perspective of like what makes sense for planning, that seems the better way to go. I agree with Dr. Heinz's suggestion that we should be doing some sort of holistic look at the district. This is all part of the mission, vision, strategy kind of work that he's been talking about doing since he got here. And makes sense, right? To periodically reevaluate what's working and what's not working in a school district and see if we could be serving students better. I think parents probably could chime in here on this conversation and say, here are the ways in which I think these various programs could be improved, or you could be doing something differently. And that's great, important work, but it seems like it makes more sense to be doing that starting from normal than starting from emergency crazy budget and figuring out what to put back in. I like the idea instead of in non-emergency times, because last year was a crazy budgeting process, starting over and looking again at what makes sense as we go forward with these numbers. And I think that we didn't fully address my question, but was kind of maybe my previous question, which was kind of maybe rhetorical at this point. But I want to throw out there again that I think we should be thinking about whether or not we need to be doing something much more drastic to make sure that we have what we need for the kids next year. And that's really, a question at the topmost point for Dr. Heinz to come to the board and tell us, this is what we need, this is what we can and can't do with the maximum amount of money that we could possibly be getting using normal channels next year.
Emily?
Thanks. I just wanted to point out, first of all, what Larry's suggestion, and I think Rachel, you may be alluding to it as well. I would love for us to see at our next meeting, if possible, or in the next two meetings, a budget by program type of setup where we do look at what we are delivering in the school district and what the principals and directors think are programs that we could reformat or change to make them more equitable, perhaps, for our entire community. So I would love to be able to see, or what they're costing us. So I think, it's great. It would be good for us to be able to look at it in that way. And in kind of those lines, we mentioned earlier that we only have two teaching positions that are extra positions in the FELP program for the elementary school students. But I believe the reason for that is because we've used our current teachers, right? So our current specials teachers, our STEAM PEP teachers, correct? So if in fact we did continue to have a elementary school FELP program in the following September, let's say, that we would have to include the costs for that as well. So it wouldn't be just two teachers. I just want us to be clear that I would love to know what the program actually costs us. So but the school, and we should put that also in our budget discussions. What are the costs for keeping an FELP program running next year? We don't know we don't know. So we should have all those numbers in front of us.
Well, I'm afraid we don't use accounting codes
I know.
by those programs. And I would have to work with Dr. Shields to see how we could accommodate that. Even our programs at the middle school and the high school, the numbers that are given to us by the principals are for supplies, for equipment. It's not, as I said, it's not broken down by the math department, the science department,
No, but
who's doing physics versus biology, or who's doing home and careers.
No, I understand that, but we do know, for instance, how much sports costs us, right? We can say how much, arts programs or the arts, in other words, the productions. I think we can say how much the esteem teachers and that esteem program costs us. I think we can say that we know what the research program at the high school costs us. So I'm not talking about, what the social studies department costs us. I'm talking about programs that we run that are above and beyond. I think we also have had in the past discussions about what, all the AP courses that we offer, and do we have to offer all of them, and perhaps we should cut them. Again, I just want us to maybe look at our budget other than just the costs, because it is staffing. Clearly that is 80-90% of our budget, right? But what that staffing means, and what type of programming we're offering for that staffing. Am I making sense?
Yes.
Thank you.
Julie, I saw your hand up and down. Did you have something?
I'm good. Mary answered it as I raised it too fast. She was good in her answer, so it was all good.
Okay. So I think we've had a lot of discussion here, and we are still at a $947,000 gap from my notes. And I don't believe we're any closer to coming to an answer on that. And I don't think we're any closer to coming to an answer on what we would want to spend for transfer to capital either. I'm going to throw it to you, Dr. Hines. Do you have some suggestions on closing that gap on the transfer to capital? Because I really think we need to hear from you.
Yeah, definitely. Well, my suggestion is I need to, after this meeting, sit down with my team and talk about many of the topics that we discussed. So transfer to capital will certainly be one. I need to know at some point how comfortable the board is in dipping into our reserves, knowing that we probably can't replenish them, moving forward, at least initially. I think that's going to be incredibly important for us as we begin to discuss this, because we are at a gap right now, and part of the solution might be to go more into the reserves to preserve some of the staff or programs that we have. But I think the most important thing for us is for me to get together with the cabinet and make a recommendation at our next meeting. I think it's in 2 weeks.
Emily, I saw your note, Emily. It doesn't include all the roofs.
It includes the three that we just talked about. So
It doesn't.
1.63. If you added 1.1,
Uh-huh.
I was adding,
1.1, 750 and 887 doesn't come to 1.63.
what does it come out to? What
Like 2.5.
So while we're figuring out that math, I also know that I recall us discussing at some point whether, and I'm only mentioning it because it was mentioned before, does the district consider going out for another bond at some point in the very near future? Instead of this slow drip of trying to heal all the roofs and make sure, you know, they're all taken care of. It's something that we may want to consider. And to be honest with you, you know, and we said this before, we know Ms. Callahan is retiring. We know we have someone else coming aboard soon, hopefully, right? So, you know, they may have other suggestions and or ideas too as we move forward. So there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of spinning plates, however else we want to say. But you know, the transfer to capital, I think, is part of the conversation as we move forward. You know, going back to what Mary and I think what Rachel said, and Emily too, actually, is looking at our programs, because it's staff. That's what it comes down to. It comes down to staff. And I will say this, but you know this already. Once we start reducing staff, it is going to be almost impossible to bring them back, especially in the short term. So I've learned a lot with the last budget process here. You know, when we talk about potentially reducing something or removing it in its entirety, we know what happens, right? There's a cause and then there's an effect. And we all need to be, as much as we can, on the same page when I make my recommendations to you as we move forward.
Okay. Julie?
I forgot to unmute. I lowered my hand. I'm sorry. I had a technical question for Mary. Mary, you mentioned that if we increase the transfer to capital line, it reduces the gap because it's an exclusion in the tax levy limit formula. But that's only if the money added comes from someplace else that was already planned. So
That's what I said, yes.
yes. Okay. So in that situation, if we were to increase the transfer to capital line to cover more than just the roof, the Salem roof, would that qualify as that but in order to lessen the gap? And what is the percentage that the gap lessens? Like, what would we have to do to increase the transfer to capital line, but lessen your gap of 947,000? What, do you have a number that takes us to, or how that's structured?
It's an equal adjustment.
It
So
is.
if you increase the transfer to capital line by 500,000, you drop the gap by 500,000. But again, without increasing the budget, you're taking away from program, because debt service and benefits can't be adjusted, nor can operational expenses for utilities and things of that nature. So it's the center part of the core part of your program, which is services to students, that would be impacted.
Perfect. No, thank you. I understand that. I just wanted to understand the dollar to dollar. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Deborah?
I wanted to understand, if we do the bond, does that mean we're not going to do any transfer to capital for the roofs? And if we don't do any transfer to capital for the roofs and we do the bond instead, how does that affect our allowable levy limit?
That brings our allowable levy limit down. If it drops down below what it was last year, the levy goes down, and then the next time you add money to transfer to capital, or keep in mind that in another year or two, we're going to be adding the expense of the bond itself from 2015 up till now. Every year we have done temporary borrowing with the hope of getting to the goal as close as possible to doing our long-term borrowing when our 2001 bond borrowing falls off our books, so that it moves into the budget seamlessly. If whenever you impact those exclusions, it does hit the levy.
So might a bond not be in our best interest right now?
Deborah, that would be assuming that we didn't continue putting money into transfer to capital. So just because we talked about doing a roof bond doesn't mean we would have to eliminate the transfer to capital money, because we have a whole host of projects, as Jim, I'm sure, could speak to, from the track to the tennis courts to, I'm sure, bathrooms, and I'm sure his list is immeasurable if he goes into the
We
the
do
list
have
of
a
things.
5-year list.
Right, we have a 5-year list. So if we chose to do a bond for the roofs, I think we would continue. I mean, I'm speaking for myself, and we as a board would have to make that decision. But just because we chose to do a bond for the roofs does not mean we would take this money out of transfer to capital. It simply means that we would take the roof work out of transfer to capital and start looking at some other projects that were not roofs.
Well, that's what I wanted to understand. I wanted to understand, because we had talked about doing a bond for the roofs. And I just wanted to be clear, I understood, and also that the public understood what exactly that means with respect to the transfer to capital.
And just keep in mind, from a technical perspective, there are resolutions a board has to pass if they want to have a bond. They have to have legal work done in advance. There has to be a certain number of days between that resolution and when the community votes on it. And of course, the board, the community does have to adopt the bond to begin with. And the bonding itself doesn't happen until the first borrowing, which cannot happen until after your plans and specs are approved and your contract is signed for some of that work. So we're talking about not this budget for at least a financial impact, but maybe a year or maybe 2 years from now before that would be part of the budget discussion.
Dr. Hines, did you want to comment before I move on to the next questions?
I do, real quick. I think what I'd like to do is to lay out to this committee what I'd like to see in next year's budget. And what will happen is it'll be more than the levy increase. And then the question will become, would the board want to consider piercing the cap? And we know how some of us feel about piercing the cap. Now, we can rob Peter to pay Paul to see how that works, or we can look at, I think Larry's mentioned this many times, what's something as a school district in its totality that we want to see, and see if we can garner support for it. That is why, again, why we're starting to use Thought Exchange to test drive and to see what the community is thinking about certain things. And I think this is the perfect opportunity to engage in those conversations with the community about the potential of doing so. But it has to be really clear as far as what would happen from a program perspective, district-wide. So instead of looking at the minimal amount we can keep dribbling in here and there, it's what do we actually want to see and what is the total cost, and then make a decision from there.
Nora and then Rachel.
I just want to say, this isn't why I had my hand up, but I like that approach a lot, what you just suggested. So I think that's great. And I don't know, Mary, if you answered this before, and I know you have answered it in the past, but other than like the roof work, what would be covered by, if we went the transfer to capital option and increased transfer to capital, what can be put into transfer to capital? What can be spent with that money aside from, capital improvements like the roof?
Well, the list that Jim and I had put together has recoating the track surface, asphalt replacement on the tennis courts, 5 existing tennis courts, classroom windows at Daly, fire alarm system at Guggenheim, fire alarm system at Sousa, asphalt pavement at the Montford lot, upgrades to electrical and mechanical systems for implementation for future central air conditioning in some schools, if we get to that point. A tie-in to the security systems, to our existing PA systems and backup generators for life and safety equipment in the school buildings. That was the list that we had come up with. I don't have a grand total for that, but it's millions of dollars.
Are any of those, I'm sure not all by any means, and some of them I know are like very reasonable wish list items at this point, but are any of those items currently in next year's budget? Not, towards the.
No.
Okay.
No.
Thank you.
Sure. And just again, on a technical perspective, I mentioned that I will be filing on March 1st, the first tax levy limit, but you should know that April 6th is the board meeting at which we would normally adopt a budget. That is slightly more than 30 days before the budget vote. So if we had to drag it out, we could, but I think by that Friday or the following Monday is the deadlines. So just to keep those numbers in the back of those dates in the back of your minds as we work forward. And I do believe that we have a meeting scheduled for next Monday. I don't know, however, if that gives Dr. Hines any time to really get his work done.
We have a meeting scheduled for next Monday already?
I think we do, because the following week is the break.
Okay. So we have another budget meeting before the next board meeting?
We do, because of the break, but we don't have to have it. I don't know if we will have any more information for you at that point.
Okay. We could always move that to the 22nd if we need to. We can discuss that. Rachel,
Okay.
though, you were next.
So I just wanted to sort of express my exuberant support for the idea of using Thought Exchange now that we have it to feel out the community. I think over the past, we've never been in this bad a situation, but since I became a parent in this district, I've heard the idea of piercing the cap and bonds bandied around frequently, and we have had to make those decisions while I'm sitting on the board, and previous boards have had to make that decision based on supposition about what the community will and will not support. And I think that's a very difficult thing to tell. It seems to me that we are in a difficult enough position this year that it's certainly worth exploring. And if we could get a better sense of what parents specifically would support, that would be fantastic. In my head, I always roughly break community into two groups. I think we have a group of people who are going to think that we are overspending literally no matter how much we spend, who are going to complain about how much they're taxed, who are going to say the taxes are too high. We passed the lowest increase last year in recent memory, and I'm still seeing conversations on Facebook about our crazy 14% tax increase, which, for clarity's sake, I want to add is not what the increase was. It was 1.99%. But when people see their tax bill, it's complicated, and many people do not understand that the amount on their tax bill is not necessarily a direct relationship to a decision that the school district makes. And so the school district had an increase of 1.99%, which was a scraping as low as we could go. And if somebody's individual tax bill went up more, that has to do with Nassau County and the town of North Hempstead and the assessment process, not with us. But so we're dealing with this population of people who are not paying enough attention, are going to complain no matter what the amount is. And then we also have a lot of parents and active community members who either believe heartily in education or raise children or have grandchildren here and want to support the schools, who will support what the schools explain to them is the amount of money we need. And I think we should tap into those people. I know a lot of members of this board had a lot of concern last year that a budget was not going to increase, and that's why we went with the 1.99%. Personally, I supported the budget because I think all Board of Education members have an obligation to support the budget once it is whatever it is. But before that, I voiced my opposition. I thought the number should be much higher from the beginning. I thought we needed to leave it at the 3.98 or whatever we were at before the pandemic hit, because I thought we were going to have unexpected expenses. And I think we saw the budget pass last year in record numbers. We had record turnout and we had record numbers. And this year we are looking at another very controversial year. We also have 3 seats up for the Board of Education. We may have a really good turnout as well. And I think we should start talking to the public now and educate them and figure out what our long-term plan is on funding this. So thank you, Dr. Hines. Let's use Thought Exchange. We have it. Let's figure out what people will give us.
Rachel, I just have to comment because even in my time on the board and certainly in my time as an involved parent, this is definitely not the worst budget that we've faced. It's not the worst gap that we've had. And I don't know if your children were in the district when we did things like cut the PEP program almost down to nothing, cut the librarians and cut our guidance counselors. I believe we cut, and Dr. Shields would probably be best able to, but I think we cut guidance counselors almost completely at the elementary level, or I think we cut them in half and we cut librarians almost completely. I think we cut librarians completely. Is that correct, Dr. Shields? Like we really went bare bones. So we've done it before and gotten the staff back. So I also want to make sure that we're aware that we have done this before. I'm not saying that we want to walk the road, but we have walked this road and we have actually been able to build the staff back. But Dr. Shields, could you perhaps comment, as you were a principal in the elementary level at the time?
Well, we reduced our librarians to part-time. They were full-time in each of the elementary schools. We went to part-time. We've since restored them back to full-time. We also reduced guidance staff. I believe it was in half, but it wasn't half each person. We were sharing people across buildings. And we've been able to restore those as well. But that was a very challenging time when we had to reduce that many staff members at once.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of make it clear that we've walked this road before. So, and I think much worse than we're at now. I think at that time we were looking for a few $1 million, which is not what we're looking for now. And we didn't have any place to get it from. And we were in fiscal stress or susceptible to fiscal stress. Things were worse than we're looking at now. And I just want to make sure that the public is aware that we have sort of fought that fight and battled back. And I think it's great to do all of the things that we're saying. And I certainly think the idea of using Thought Exchange and going out to the community is a good idea. But I don't want to leave anybody with the impression, because those of us who have older children who were in elementary school at the time remember worse times than this. So I just wanted that to be clear. I'm not sure who was next.
So, Beth, if you don't mind me just adding something, I think the goal is to not be in that position again, right? Because when we say, you know, the kids that are in high school now or have recently graduated lived through it, it's not like my household has a lower income this year, so I'm not going to redo my kitchen, and it's okay, we won't have a new kitchen for a couple of years. Those kids lived through having fewer librarians and fewer guidance counselors and no PEP program. And that's an impact on their education. And that's the part that I want to avoid. I don't think we should settle for that.
I don't disagree, but you made a statement that this is the worst budget that we faced. And I don't believe that that is a a fair and accurate statement. And I think there are people who are watching that are going to be aware that it's not a fair and accurate statement. We've been in much worse situation before. So I don't think that I'm not disagreeing with the concept, Rachel, at all. I just want to make sure that we're clear that this is not the worst budget crisis we faced, not even in recent memory, because we had a 0.12 year. So we've had worse.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly what I said, but I definitely didn't mean to imply that our district is in the worst. In terms of the program we are delivering, it is not the program that we were delivering in 1920. And I would like us to get back at least to that. But that program reflected, you're totally right, a building back that took probably a decade, right?
No, it wasn't a decade. I wouldn't say that. With the first set of cuts were 2008, and then we had the 0.12 year where we had some additional cuts that was back in the tax cap years. So it's been a back and forth. It's always a back and forth. But again, like I said, I just want to make sure that we're clear that this is not the worst. And certainly I have no desire, and I don't think anybody on this board has a desire to cut anything. So if we can figure out a way to make this work without making those cuts, I think that's fantastic. And if we think we can, pierce the tax cap and we can use thought exchange and we can build, I don't have a problem with having that conversation. I just want to be very clear that this is definitely not, we have sat down with a $2 million or a $3 million gap for a budget to budget and tried to figure that out. So this is not the worst that I've seen in my time on the board. And I think that
I think getting yourself into a deep hole takes time though, and it's over multiple decisions. And so we're looking at a very low levy increase from the governor this year. We may be looking at a very low levy increase from him next year as well. And that's on top of the however much we left on the table voluntarily last year. And so we don't want to be in a position where suddenly we do have children living without guidance counselors that we think are important and librarians, and we're not serving the gifted and talented students at all, and we're not giving the extra reading help that's life-changing for kids, and we don't have an inclusive classroom. I mean, I know I'm preaching to the choir, Beth. I know you're agreeing with me. We don't want to be there.
You're preaching to a group of people that would have all of those things. So yeah. I hear you. Like I said, I was just trying to make sure that we were clear that we have done and had bigger gaps than this in recent memory, not even in longer memory. So that was my only point. I have no idea who was next here though. So was it Emily? Was it Nora, Larry?
It's Deborah, Emily, Nora, Larry.
Okay.
Thank you, Emily. So whatever this, gap of $950,000 some odd dollars, it's on top of the cuts we made last year that we may be trying to claw back. And so I'll be interested to see what is on the chopping block for this year to try to make up for that difference in addition to what we had to chop off last year. I'm wondering, do we have any indication from the state how the elections are going to be run this year? Are we again doing absentee ballots to every single eligible voter? Do we know? Is it going to revert to in person? Do we have any sense? And also I'll just add editorially that it would be kind of ironic if piercing the cap took us to 1.99%, which is what our budget increase was last year. But that's just neither here nor there. But Mary, have you heard, because I've been watching the news, I haven't heard anything from Albany. I guess it's too early, but I didn't know if you had heard rumblings. Are we going to do absentee ballots again to everybody, or do you know?
We have not heard so far. Ruth is planning on in-person, which I agree with. If we have to pivot, as we say so often, we will. But I would prefer to not incur that additional expense. Certainly, it worked well. I was amazed that it was so flawless, but both Ruth and Jessica were very, very organized with the process last year. But I am hoping for in-person.
Let's keep in mind, we had an in-person general election already in between that time, so I think it's probably likely it'll be an in-person vote. I think last June was very different than what we'd be facing now in May, because you're at a point where we have figured out maybe how to live and distance and do all these things. So I would imagine with more generous absentee ballot options like you had in the general election, but I would have to think that that's probably a safe bet. Nora, I think, or Larry, I don't know.
Oh, Emily, see?
Emily, okay. I don't see it
Got it.
anymore. You left my screen.
Okay. I actually wanted to bring back, I'm glad that Deborah brought up the in-person voting or mail-in, because I think that's one of the things we have to remember with regards to last year's vote, and the decisions that we made last year as a school board on what our actual levy increase was. And we keep talking about leaving money on the table, but I think when we were making these decisions back in May of last year, April and May of last year, as a matter of fact, I think it might have been April, because we didn't know that, we were talking about when, we didn't even know when we were going to have the budget vote. It was a very different world, and we were in a very different situation with regards to what we knew about the pandemic. So I just want, I'm not going to say I take offense, but I just want to remind everyone that we didn't leave $2 million on the table because we thought, oh, what the heck? We left $2 million on the table because we were very worried about the state of the economy, the state of our community, and we were trying to be responsible board members, not, board members who don't care about education. So I want to point that out. I also want to point out that we've talked about a bond in the past, and I remember it being February, as today is February 1st, last year, or maybe the year before, where we were talking about a bond, and we were told that February was too late to have a bond discussion and get a bond ready for a May vote. So I am questioning now why we're discussing a bond right now, where we learned that transfer to capital was then given to us as an option, and we used it as an option to fix some of the roofing issues that we had a problem with. So I'm just, how would we be doing a bond in May, if we're voting in May, which we're assuming we're going to vote in May, and we're assuming we're going to be back in person. I agree with you, Beth. I think, we're back. We've progressed from last year, so that we're going to have people coming in person, and we are going to have, I think, the ability for absentee. So how can we be discussing bond right now?
I think, Emily, the point for the bond wouldn't be for May. It would be for looking forward, because I think we still have a substantial amount of transfer to capital that we cut it last year. We were going to do more, and I don't think we're looking at doing much more this year. So it's just a question of whether or not we can get done what we need to get done in the amount of time. I don't think it was for May. But Nora,
to be clear, you're right, and that should be clear.
Nora. And there we go. Unmute. There we go.
Okay, yes. No, I was trying to get my hand down and unmute at the same time, which didn't work. I want to say a lot of what Emily said is what I was going to say, so I'll just repeat it and take up time. No, I want to say that I do think there's going to be a combination like there was in the general election. So I do think mail-in ballots will be big for certain members of our community if it's an option. I think there will be, it's not that far off from now, there will be plenty of people that aren't immunized or aren't vaccinated. So I do think it'll be both, but I would like to see in person as well, of course, like you all said. And what Emily said about leaving money on the table, and I feel the same way, and I'm not going to repeat everything she said, but I do agree with what she said. And going back and thinking back, we didn't leave money on the table because we weren't concerned about the quality of our instruction, the quality of programming, etc. We left, if you want to call it that, we didn't go further. We didn't even go to the what our levy increase would have been, what our allowed levy increase would have been. In fact, we stayed under, I think, what the we were right at what the cap was, right? What the actual, what was the actual number that was the cap?
Our number was going to be 3.38 or
Would
3.4.
that pierce the cap, right?
Yes.
Would have been, okay, yes. But what was our actual,
And our actual number was 1.99.
right?
And I believe the state number
That's
was
what-
1.81.
Okay, so we went over the state number, but we did, and we stayed under the 2 for, some of us
Yes.
felt that that had like a special meaning, because even though 2 really means nothing except for it's in the perception. But I think we did it because I know we did it. I know I did it, and when we talked about it, because we were so concerned about the fiscal health and the financial stress on this community. I do think whatever we do this year, we should make sure that the community understands what we did last year and make it really clear and why we did it last year. And I wouldn't say, I don't think it's a great selling point to say, hey, we left $2 million on the table last year, because it's not the way I look at it either. But we were so mindful last year of the community, like we did the least amount we could do and really keep the schools running and open and take care of things that we need to take care of. So I do think that would count to certain voters if they had to stretch more this year. And the last thing I wanted to say was, no, that was it actually. Reminding people of the numbers of last year's numbers and what they actually mean, because I'm not sure that everybody, I think every year people need a reminder of what the various numbers mean, the state number, our levy limit, what we can go to over the limit without piercing and all that. So that's it.
Larry?
Okay, well, I won't get involved in last year's number or what we did, but back in 2005, the budget failed and we were on a contingent budget. And the contingent budget was under different rules, and we actually were allowed somewhat of an increase, I believe. It wasn't exactly where we are as it is now, but perhaps Mary can correct me. Anyway, it took us at least 10 years to come back from that. So to say, oh yeah, we always cut stuff, we always bring it back, is not correct. And we still haven't brought back some of the stuff that we had prior to the contingent budget. So, cuts do, and Dr. Hines was saying a lot, if we get rid of staff, we're not going to be able to bring them back. If we get rid of programs, we're not going to be able to bring them back. And so, and then there are programs we want to add. We want to add inclusion. Well, we're going to have to get rid of something else to do that, and so we either have to, it's like anything else, we either have to bring in more money or cut our expenses. The only place we can cut expenses is in staff. So those are our choices. We either increase revenue or we get rid of staff, and it's an A or B, and there's nothing really in the middle. So anyway, just wanted to say that, and you know where I stand. I stand on bringing in the revenue.
Rachel?
I just wanted to add that, and I think this is obvious, but this is for us to be thinking about, and also for the community to understand. Having a conversation about whether or not we should be adding a bond is still an appropriate conversation to be having now, because it can be part of the big picture of the discussion of the budget, right? Because we need to know how we're funding the roofs. The roofs are important and they have to be funded. And if a roof bond is going to be our solution, even if we can't manage to do it on the time frame of this budget, we can potentially take it into account in this budget and know that the roof money is coming in on X date after as the result of the bonds. But obviously there's a lot more work to be done to figure out any of these additional options.
That stepped away, but I'll just say what Rachel said. I think with regards to the roof bond, though, with regards to this upcoming budget, we need to still have roofs taken care of in this particular budget. We can't say, well, we're going to wait for Salem roof till we do a roof bond. So we're going to have that transfer to capital money and we'll use it for something else. We need to be able to say in this particular budget now that we are going to use X amount of money transfer to capital, and that X amount of money is going to be for Salem roof, for Schreiber roof, for Daily roof, for no roofs, but we need to be specific about what our goals are. The roof bond could be something that we do down the road. And from what I remember in our conversations in the past couple of years, it was we needed to kind of start the conversation immediately for 2 years from now. In other words, we cannot, Mary, correct me if I'm wrong, but I do remember being told in a February budget meeting that we did not have enough time to do a roof bond for a May budget vote. Am I correct on this? February to May?
Yes, because the thought was that the community had to have full understanding of the issues of the roofs. You also had a board member at one time who felt that the interest on the bond cost the community more money and that it was a better option to spread it out over a number of years.
Right.
Of course, each board makes their own decision on an annual basis.
Correct. But so, thank you. So I just want to be, so I just want us to all understand, having a discussion about a roof bond does not mean we still need to take care of Salem, which we've been told is in trouble. And we've seen it. Many of us, some of us have been on that roof and we've seen Salem is in trouble. So we can't put aside is what I'm saying. The
So
roof.
can I know we have people with their hands up, but we're an hour and 45 minutes into this meeting, and I don't think we're going to make any progress.
I'm done with my comments. So.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to make any progress. I want to see if there's a consensus that we could move on. First of all, I would say to reschedule the next meeting for the 22nd instead of next Monday. Because I don't think next Monday is going to give the district staff, central office enough time to do what we need to do. And what I would say additionally is, could by the 22nd, Dr. Hines, could you have prepared what you have discussed, which is a presentation exactly like you said, something that we would be ready to go out to the community and do thought exchange and sort of see where people stand so that we can have an idea of what we want to do, what we could do, what the potential is. Is that a possibility?
Of course, 100%.
Okay.
Look
So-
forward to it.
I think if we did that, I would like to have Mary's sort of baseline budget presentation for the next board meeting that goes over the levy limit and the cap and the gap and all of that. So I think, is that reasonable for next Tuesday, Mary?
Yes, I had already started that. Yes.
I think that's important. Just because I think we need to start having that conversation. I think we need to start having next year's budget conversation at our board meetings. Is everybody comfortable with, I know Rachel, you have your hands up, so it's really, are you comfortable with ending this conversation now and picking it back up at the
So
next
yes, of course. But I have a question for you,
Go ahead.
actually, if you
Sure.
don't mind.
course.
Because Mary mentions that we had this conversation about the roofs and that made me harken back to before the pandemic, which feels
Yeah.
about 100 years ago.
It was actually 100 years ago, Rachel.
So
It
it's
actually
easy to
was.
forget those conversations, but she's right. We had really extensive conversations in the budget committee when
did.
Dave Turpin was on the board about the roofs and the fact that the roofs are an emergency. I totally agree with Emily, by the way. I'm not suggesting that we just like wait for roofs to fall in. And we talked about the various different ways that we could deal with it. And at the time, financially, it did seem like it made more sense to not do a bond. But we're in a completely different financial position now with a different amount of reserves. Do you think that it makes sense to have that conversation again explicitly at some future board meeting and
Yes.
figure out what the long-term plan on the roof should look like now that we're in a different fiscal position?
I think here's the issue. It was never just the roofs. It was all of our transfer to capital. And we had conversations about doing the roofs, but also adding. So it would have been roofs last year, say on the track. And then the next year would have been a few roofs and the tennis courts. And then the following year was a few roofs and some windows. We cut already last year from the roof projects. Forget about the other stuff that we were discussing adding. So I think the problem is, I don't know if, I think we have to have the bond conversation, because I don't think, I'm not sure we can play catch up through the budget at this point to get to where we need to be. Because honestly, I feel, and I think some other people who have been on this board as long as I have and longer would agree, that we just need to get these buildings to where a couple $1 million a year in transfer to capital will actually maintain them. And we're not there. We're not there, and we won't be for 10 years if we continue this way. So perhaps we need to look at taking a bigger chunk, getting those big projects done through a bond so that we can do the $2 million a year and be maintaining bathrooms and windows and doors and keeping the building sealed and all of those kind of things, because we're just not getting there. I think it was a valiant effort, and I think it was worth trying. And in my personal opinion, we're not going to get there. I know that Jim Rossano would agree with me. It's not happening fast enough, and we're constantly putting out fires. His staff is constantly putting out fires. So if you want to comment,
something to that.
Of course.
If you don't mind. Yeah. We were doing very well until this hit, the COVID hit. I think if we weren't in this position, I think we would, another couple of years, you'd be in very good shape. But now it's a different ball game now. And it's not even a year. Yeah, it's not even a year. It's March. Next month will be a year that we went into this, and it put us behind.
It changed. So as Jim's saying, right, it changed the conversation. We're not having the same conversation we were having pre-COVID. And so we need to have it again, because that's what we need to do. And it's also a different board, and we need to have it. So yes, Rachel, a very long roundabout answer to that question is, and for those reasons, yes, it's a different conversation, and we absolutely need to have it. So I think that all of that needs to be part of what we discuss on the 22nd at Budget and Facilities, and then bring to a general board meeting in greater detail.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. So if everybody's comfortable with adjourning, I think we will adjourn with a plan to have that conversation on the 22nd. Mary, same time. Mary and Ruth, same time on the 22nd, unless somebody gives us an objection.
That there are 2 attendees. I don't know if you want to open up to community.
Oh, we have public? Huh.
There's 2.
Awesome.
If they have community
Does
comments.
anybody from the public have a comment or a question? Raise your hand.
No.
No. Okay. All right. Then we are going to adjourn the meeting. I thank you all for attending. I will see you all at the board meeting in a week, and we will reconvene here on the 22nd. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everybody.